Hello and welcome to Take Me Home, the podcast offering a social democratic alternative for the politically homeless. I'm hilary.salt.
And I'm Sebastian.moore.
We're probably going to race through quite a quick episode today because we have a lot going on at SDP Towers, don't we?
Very much so. We're in election season.
Absolutely. But we thought we couldn't let the week go by without a few words about the budget. Rachel Reeves is... non-budget.
It's not a budget, is it, right?
Yeah. Spring statement. Sorry, my first mistake there. So I'll give you a few headlines on that. And Sebastian, you want to talk about happiness again, don't you?
Happiness.
It's one of your favourites.
Say again. I did talk about gross national happiness, didn't I?
You did?
Yeah. Maybe I'll come back to it frequently.
Okay.
We should have a monthly happiness roundup.
Sounds like a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Better than a sadness roundup.
So shall I kick us off?
Yeah, go on. You go.
So the news is, and this came out just, I think, the day that we recorded last week.
Okay.
So it's sort of last week's news, but it's since we did our last episode. So the World Happiness Report. Do you know about this?
I don't really know, no.
So it's commissioned, it's done yearly. It's been done for the last, I think for the last 15 years or so. Oh, this is the 13th annual World Happiness Report. Do you know which country came top?
I think you told me, so it would be. I would be pretending if I said that I didn't know and pretended to guess.
So Finland, for the 8th year in a row.
Oh, I didn't know that. It's the 8th year in a row.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think Denmark topped it briefly, and there was a bit of a tussle between Denmark and Finland, and now Finland's sort of gone out into the lead.
Okay.
So it's basically a survey that's done, commissioned every year, and tests what you might call life satisfaction.
Okay.
Because I think with happiness, people sort of take it to mean different things. Mm-hmm. And the way certainly that the Institute for Happiness, the Happiness Research Institute in Copenhagen, which I've told you about before, because I've actually visited and met the CEO. They talk about happiness in 3 different ways. So you've got, the first is what you might think of as quite hedonistic. So the pleasures, the short-term pleasures.
Yes.
The second is life satisfaction. So this is, are you happy with where you're at in your life at the moment? Is your job something that you get meaning from, your relationships, all of the stuff that we sort of, I think often when we talk about happiness, we're actually referring to that second one.
Yes.
The life satisfaction.
Contentedness.
Yeah, I think contentedness, that's a way of putting it. And then the third would be eudaimonia. Do you know what eudaimonia is?
So that's kind of the feeling of goodness you have. Virtue would be a good word for that, would it?
Yeah, I think it's one that exists in a far bigger time period. So it's the sort of the legacy you leave behind, and the feeling that you're fulfilling it's like self-actualization in a way.
Yes.
And Aristotle coined this term, eudaimonia. And so what they say in the Happiness Research Institute is that they're very much focused on the middle one, the life satisfaction. And by comparing different countries, you can see that the life satisfaction of inhabitants of Finland, for example, is higher than that of the UK. So any idea where the UK finished on this?
13th.
23rd.
Okay.
So
what 3, right?
What you do find is that the developed countries do rank much more highly than undeveloped countries. Mm-hmm. The US?
17th.
24th.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, which is its lowest ever position. So supposedly the US is now less happy under Trump. Oh, well. Maybe. What I love about this is that Finland, for example, it's this article I read about it, said that 90% of Finns use a sauna daily. Every week. 90% of Finns use a sauna every week. Isn't that amazing? I'd love to live in a country where it's just normal practice to use the sauna.
I kind of, if you asked me to visualise somebody in Finland, a sauna would definitely be part of the picture.
Right. A couple of interesting additions to the top 10, Costa Rica and Mexico. Mm-hmm. So I think we see with how economies in different parts of the world are developing, and places like Costa Rica and Mexico, you wouldn't have necessarily associated them with the happiness index, because usually it's Scandinavian countries.
Yeah.
Australia ranks quite highly often, Switzerland, countries like that. So yeah, it's quite surprising. But what's your take on that, the happiness report? Do you think it's a good thing to be measuring?
I just think it's such a subjective thing, and I think people generally judge their happiness by how happy, where they are compared to somebody else. So it's very comparable. So aren't there studies that say that even in very poor societies, if you don't have a big difference in wealth, people can be very happy because, they don't feel angry that somebody else has got a lot more than them. But, the fact that those people are happy doesn't mean that they shouldn't see more development and more infrastructure building and be a wealthier society. And I just worry that it kind of potentially stops people being aspirational. I'm happy enough,
Do you not think it's you're aspirational to be number one in the world?
That which makes the world a better place, makes us invent new things, innovate.
But aspirational to be number one in the happiness report.
Oh right, okay. Well, I don't know. I mean, Finland. I don't think I'd want to go and live in Finland. Would you?
I think right. So I think what this shows us is that Finland can't change its weather.
No.
Not yet, anyway. And it can't change where it's located, but it can do things like increasing, public facilities, and I think the people will have a strong sense of culture. We talked about hygge a few episodes ago. I think there is more of a feeling that these things are important, like eating dinner around a table with your family, which we've just lost in the UK, and I think these things are the things that I aspire to.
Yeah. Heated pavements as well, they have, don't they?
Do they really?
Yes.
Heated pavements. Wow, that's cool. And every year they try to do an extra sort of study that goes into the happiness report. So they did an experiment where people would lose their wallets and to see if they were returned.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that they were returned twice as much as people had been expecting when they'd asked them how do you think somebody would return the wallet? And so they're saying that this shows that strangers are about twice as kind as people expect them to be.
That's good.
Which I think is a nice takeaway from this.
It
and
is.
I do think it can feel when you're watching the news, or God forbid if you go on Twitter and see some of the stuff that people are posting on Twitter, you can get this impression that people are a certain way and are not kind. And yet when it comes down to it, I think generally people are. And I would, even in Manchester, with how low trust that our society has become, I still feel that generally I could go and ask a stranger for help and they would.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's the World Happiness Report.
Great. Well, our happiness reporter will be back with us in another 6 months, I guess.
I love that. That became my job.
Yeah. Super.
Okay, budget time. Oh, it's not budget. So
spring statement.
It can only be a budget if there's raising taxes or expenditure. Is that right? And if it can't, for it to be referred to as a fiscal statement, it can't do that, can it? It can't raise taxes. Is that just a myth?
It has done some raising of taxes in terms of cutting back on tax avoidance. Sorry. Oh, which is which now? Tax evasion is the illegal one, isn't it? So
I can never remember.
I don't know why it's not a budget. It is a budget, really. Let's not get bogged down in the terminology. I think it is, to all intents and purposes, a budget. When we said we'd do this episode, I kind of thought we'll be doing lots of nitty-gritty numbers. And actually, there's not an awful lot of nitty-gritty numbers. So I just perhaps wanted to pull out 3 headlines and 3 comments on the budget, if that's okay. So the 3 headlines, I think the things that people are very aware of that have been in the news a lot are the cuts to some welfare payments and the freezing of some welfare payments. In particular, the kind of benefits that people have in ill health, the PIP, personal independence payments, and the health element of universal credit. So cutting those, is the thing that's made the big headline, that this is obviously it upset a lot of Labour voters and a lot of Labour MPs, actually. I don't want to focus too much on that because we talked a lot about that a few episodes ago, didn't we? So, but that's certainly one of the big ticket items in there. There's also changes in departmental spending. So I think the one that most people will have noticed in the news is another 2.2 billion, I think it is, additional spending on defence, which is part of the idea that we're trying to push that up to 2.5% of GDP. I don't know why. That's the only thing we kind of have a target of how much to spend. Rather than saying, how much do we need to spend? We say, we'll try and spend 2.5%. I know some of that's because of political pressure from the US, but it's an odd way to look at things. We never say we need to spend 2% on, house building or anything like that, do we? Anyway, it just as an aside. So there's that's extra spending. There's some of the things that people have seen in the news, things like the getting rid of NHS England, so getting rid of some civil servants, but actually employing other civil servants to do things like this crackdown on tax compliance to make sure they get a bigger tax take, to making sure that people pay the tax that they are meant to pay. So that's probably the second kind of area of focus on the budget.
The saving on that, though, will just be a projection, won't it? I think it's not necessarily that they're going to actually save that money.
I think overall spending is pretty much the same. It's just spent differently because they're doing some capital spending as well, and they're doing some spending on helping people back to work, so through the DWP. So I think they're changing departmental spending rather than reducing it or increasing it. Yeah, it's actually not very much different. I mean, even the defence spending is kind of mirrored by a cut in overseas aid. So overall, there's not a lot of difference there. It's just a different mix. And then the third thing that I thought was quite an important headline was that the OBR have reduced their growth forecast for this year down from 2% to 1%. So halved. I find it really strange that that's not the thing that everybody's talking about. And they've changed their forecasts for the rest of the decade to things like 1.7, 1.8%. So that massive reduction in growth this year, to me, is the most worrying thing about the budget. But it's not really the thing that people have been talking about. So I think those are the things I wanted to draw in terms of what does the budget say. Perhaps a few comments on the budget. So I keep saying budget, don't I? And I mean spring statements. When we did the actual budget episode in autumn last year, I made the point that it felt that the way that they'd done the budget was to just have a kind of goal-seeking Excel, if that makes sense. They just kind of moved around all these different elements of spending to get the right answer. There was no kind of real understanding of, for example, what the change in employers' NI would do to the economy. And it feels like, I know people are using this term, Rachel from accounts. To me, she's kind of goal-seek Rachel, because all she ever does, it seems to me, is try to make the numbers add up. And there's no narrative, there's no long-term planning. It's all just, what do I need to do to make the numbers add up? And to me, that isn't politics. That is just accounting, really. And that, I think, so for example, if you look at the things on PIP and the health elements of universal credit, to me, the way that you would do that is you would say, how do we get all these people back to work? And that might mean for the next year we have to spend more money getting people back to work. And then once we've done that, that's what will reduce the benefit spend, not just a reduction in the level of the benefit. So it feels to me that it is just a numbers game, and that's not very useful. Second comment was just around the fact that all these numbers that Rachel is, trying to make add up are all based on the OBR forecasts. Now, we already know that the OBR have made some really fundamental errors in their modelling in the past.
There's a good graph you can see. I don't know if we could put it up on the screen of the forecasts and then what actually happened.
Outcomes.
You seen that? Every time the forecast is wrong.
Yeah. And it can be like 15% of GDP wrong. That's how wrong it can be. Whereas, the Chancellor's making all these changes and doing all this planning based on these forecasts that are just, they are just forecasts. I do think that word forecast or projection, what all those things mean is let's throw the numbers forward and see what happens on the basis of certain modelling. They're not predictions. And, they, as you say, they rarely turn out, which, again, is another reason why, to me, that's not a good way to be planning your economy. And as we've said before, the OBR are not elected. The OBR, are just civil servants. We can't do anything about them. And the way in which they build their models, to me, seems to be all focused on making sure that they're never criticised. So they're always very risk averse in their models.
The OBR.
Yeah. So, it kind of feels to me that is just a bad way on which to plan the economy. And then the third point I just thought it was worth drawing out. So one of the things that Rachel Reeves said I think it was on the Today programme, I've heard her talk on a lot of things over the past couple of days. She said, we will never play fast and loose with household budgets. And yet it seems to me that the really big thing that households are struggling with, as well as businesses, is, as we've talked about before, the cost of energy. And by all their net zero planning and their failure to tackle really, the really big problem, which is the price of energy, they are exactly playing fast and loose with all of our households. So that seemed to me the real problem. And what she talks a lot about growth, and the government talks a lot about growth. And for me, the thing that would really power growth would be cheap energy. And as long as they're not prepared to think about that, it feels to me that, these budgets are just tinkering at the edges.
So for the layman, right, I suppose there's really three things you can do: raise taxes, cut spending, or grow the economy, and therefore have a bigger tax intake. And they're scared to raise taxes.
Correct.
They don't want to be seen like they're making loads of cuts, even though that's kind of what they're doing at the moment. And they would say they have to do because they've gone into government and suddenly they realise that there's the finances are in a much worse state than we originally thought.
Yeah.
And so generally, I think that their strategy, if they have one, but I'm trying to be fair, is to grow the economy.
That's right.
And it's what they'll send out ministers to talk about all the time. So I watched Darren Jones, who's the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, on Question Time. Okay. And I've got time for Darren Jones because I think he's a politician that doesn't come across as wooden and robotic. He actually says things that sort of a normal person would say. But he has to go out and defend the government position on this. And he was talking about growth and saying that's what really we've got to do is fix all of the mess so that the economy can grow. It just seems to me that that argument is a very difficult argument to make when the OBR are slashing the growth forecast from 2% to 1%. And when growth is almost non-existent. Yeah. It seems like they're pinning everything on that. Yeah. And it's an easy way of them failing massively as a government, because if the economy doesn't grow, then they've got nothing to argue. Yeah, and those growth figures are based on total GDP. If you look at GDP per person, it's actually even lower. So that is definitely the problem that they need to fix.
I mean, one of the real problems that they've got is that they are weighed down by the interest they're paying on what we've already borrowed. So I think we're paying about £105 billion each year in interest on existing borrowings.
Yeah, just to really emphasise that point.
Yeah.
That's the expenditure yearly is around £1 trillion, isn't it?
The
government expenditure every year.
I don't know about that number.
It's around £1 trillion. It was
Yeah.
approaching £1 trillion, certainly. So it's 1,000 billion, and 100 billion is going on the
interest
payments on the debt.
Yeah, and another way of just seeing how big that number is the total spending on defence after these increases is just over 60 billion, yeah. 60 billion, and then we're paying 100 billion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's staggering.
Staggering, exactly. Yeah.
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 Okay, what's the best case scenario for Labour? If you're now a Labour government minister,
yeah,
you're making the case.
Yeah.
What's the positive vision of what could happen?
They have done some, actually, I think, very helpful changes on planning. And if they can stick to their guns on that, and we can actually build some, not just houses, but build new industries, then we can get some growth. But I kind of think it's probably looking at 2 or 3 years out. And in the meantime, people, I think, will get very impatient with the government.
Okay.
So I don't think it looks great.
Okay, I can't see Keir Starmer phoning you anytime soon to call you up to the front bench.
Do you not think?
No.
I'm available.
Okay, good. So shorter episode.
Yes, absolutely, because we have lots to do.
Exactly, yeah.
Speaking of elections and politicians, probably should be saying good luck to all of our people out there on the streets campaigning.
Exactly. So we've got Dave Bettany,
Doncaster Mayor.
Yep, he's running for Doncaster Mayor. We've got Paul Murphy is standing as the candidate for the Runcorn and Helsby by-election.
Correct.
Which I think is really interesting.
Yep.
And plenty of local election candidates as well.
Yep. So if anybody from the SDP knocks on your door, please do have a chat with them. And as always, please like, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends and family, and we'll see you next time.